In the previous two episodes, I have discussed this book called Himalaya Adventures, Meditations, Life. It's a beautiful collection of essays where you find different kinds of writings by writers of the past and present. There are three sections in it, as the subtitle suggests. First, adventures, then meditations. That's what we have discussed so far. And today we are going to talk about life. Life in general in the Himalayas. And once again, there are so many writers here, so many wonderful writers. And I don't think I can do justice or I can discuss all these writers here. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a glimpse of what to expect from this section. First name, of course, that comes to mind is Ruskin Bond. He's been living in the state of Uttarakhand. He lives close to this hill station called Mussoorie. And I think anyone who grew up in India must be familiar his name, his works, his children's stories. But some of his most brilliant works, I feel, are about nature, are about his experiences, his memoir from the countryside, the Himalayas. And that's what we find in this book. There's a chapter called A Night in a Garhwal Village, and it gives you some idea about the kind of life Ruskin Bond has experienced in these mountains. So let me read a few passages from this chapter, and in his usual style, you'll get a chance to understand what he is experiencing, witnessing in the hills. Here it goes. I wake to what sounds like the din of a factory buzzer, but is in fact the music of a single vociferous cicada in the lime tree near my window. Through the open window, I focus on a pattern of small, glossy lime leaves. Then through them, I see the mountains, the Himalayas, striding away into an immensity of sky. In 1,000 ages of the gods, I could not tell thee of the glories of Himachal. So confessed a Sanskrit poet at the dawn of Indian history, and he came closer than anyone else to capturing the spell of the Himalayas. The sea has had Conrad and Stevenson and Masefield, but the mountains continue to defy the written word. We have climbed their highest peaks and crossed their most difficult passes, but still they keep their secrets and their reserve. They remain remote, mysterious, spirit-haunted. No wonder then that the people who live on the mountain slopes in the mist-filled valleys of Garhwal have long since learned humility, patience, and a quiet resignation. Deep in the crouching mist lie their villages, while climbing the mountain slopes are forests of rhododendron, spruce, and deodar, soughing in the wind from the ice-bound passes. Pale women plough, they laugh at the thunder as their men go down to the plains for work. For little grows on the beautiful mountains in the north wind. When I think of Manjri village in Garhwal, I see a small river, a tributary of the Ganga, rushing along the bottom of a steep, rocky valley. On the banks of the river and on the terraced hills above, there are small fields of corn, barley, mustard, potatoes, and onions. A few fruit trees grow near the village. Some hillsides are rugged and bare, just masses of granite. On hills exposed to wind, only grass and small shrubs are able to obtain a foothold. This landscape is typical of Garhwal, one of India's most northerly regions with its massive snow ranges bordering on Tibet. Although thinly populated, it does not provide much of a living for its people. Most Garhwali cultivators are poor, some are very poor. You have beautiful scenery, I observed after crossing the first range of hills. Yes, said my friend, but we cannot eat the scenery. And yet, these are cheerful people, sturdy and with wonderful powers of endurance. Somehow, they manage to wrest a precarious living from the unhelpful, calcinated soil. I am their guest for a few days. And then he goes on to describe his experience in the village. He stays there and he witnesses the kind of difficult life those people are living in the remote village. And to exactly find out what happens next, what happens in the village, what kind of events take place, you will have to read the chapter yourself, read the book. As far as I'm concerned, I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is called A Passage from the Hills. And it's written by Queen Mother Ashi Dorji Wangmo Wangchuk, the Queen of Bhutan, in fact. So let me narrate straight away a few passages from this chapter where Queen is recounting her childhood experiences in the Himalayas, the kind of life she lived, how she experienced the world in the mountains. So let's go to Bhutan and find out about it. So let me narrate the chapter now. In early 1962, my younger sister, Sharing Pam, and I began our formal education in the newly opened school on the lawns of the Zimchu Gomo temple. The school was a shack made of bamboo matting with a leaking tarpaulin roof. During the monsoons, the rain poured into the single classroom, drenching us as we sat laboriously writing the alphabet on our slates. Rather more impressive than the school was our schoolmaster, a handsome man who affected a British accent when he spoke English, as he had been educated at a boarding school in British India. He kept a wooden stick on his table, which he used freely to thwack unruly or inattentive students. I took good care to be neither. My carefree childhood days in Nobgang were coming to an end. In 1963, my father decided that it was time Sharing Pam and I were sent to school in the Indian town of Kalimpong, close to the Indian-Bhutan border. He had already sent my elder sister Beda and brother Sange there in 1961. My grandparents found it very hard to part with us, but my father persuaded that an English medium education was essential for the future of all his children. The preparations for our departure took no time. There was little to pack. We would buy whatever we needed in Kalimpong. It was a fine day in early spring when we set off. I still remember with a pang the sight of grandmother Uge Dame standing on the lawn of our house and waving to us until we were out of sight. It was comforting to know that at least grandfather Samdunob would be with us a little bit longer. He would accompany us on the first leg of the journey up to the capital, Thimphu. The horseback journey to Thimphu, along a well-defined mule track, took nearly 3 days. It took us through pine forests to the village of Lapsacha below Talo, then over the sheer cliffs at Kikrija, a steep and treacherous descent which had seen many travelers and horses fall to their deaths down to the river below. From Kikrija, we continued on to Chandana, a hallowed spot where an arrow shoot from Tibet by the divine madman Drukpa Kunle in the 15th century had landed on the staircase of a house. We stopped here for a while to rest and to see part of the staircase which had been carefully preserved in the shrine room of a house in nearby Tobesa. Drukpa Kunle's arrow itself, my father told us, had been interred inside a Buddha image in Tango Monastery in the Thimphu Valley. Every time we came to a particularly narrow stretch of the track or had to cross a bridge, Sharing Pam and I would be taken off the horses and guided safely across by grandfather or father. Nevertheless, we had a narrow escape on the first day of our journey. On what seemed a safe stretch through a forest, Sharing and I were put on one horse and tied securely to the saddle to ensure we didn't fall off. Suddenly, the horse saw the black stump of a burnt tree, took fright, and started galloping wildly off the path. The saddle slid under the horse's belly with the two of us strapped to it. We hung upside down in absolute terror and were badly cut and bleeding as the horse ran through thorny bushes. With superhuman effort and a lot of luck, my father managed to catch and control the horse before we came to more serious harm. We walked the rest of the way until we reached the camping ground of Lumit Saba, where we spent the first night sleeping in the open around a campfire. We were on the road again early next morning, before the sun came up. Grandfather Samdu had ingenious ways of keeping our spirits up during the long day's march. He would hide cucumbers and oranges in the bushes ahead for us to discover just when we began fretting with tiredness and thirst. From a strip of bamboo, he would deftly fashion a kongta, a tiny flat-mouthed instrument that gave us hours of amusement. He also cut bamboo stems into flutes and cheerfully endured our jarring, discordant melodies. The last stretch of the second day's journey was the climb to Dochula Pass. This stretch was spectacularly lovely. The forest ablaze with scarlet and pink rhododendrons and creamy white magnolia, and fragrant with the heady scent of daphne. The forest floor too was covered with the spring flowers, iris, anemone, euphorbia, while swathes of lavender, colored primula and deep purple iris lined the sides of the path. After the previous day's mishap, my father and grandfather walked alongside us constantly, holding the horses' reins and keeping us entertained with legends and folklore about the angels, demons, and spirits that were said to inhabit these forests. We would be on the lookout for the prettiest flowers, which we would pick to offer at the next wayside chotun. Grandfather would caution us never to offer the lavender-colored primulas. They were deemed inauspicious because they grew during a lean period in the year when people did not have enough to eat. We also learned from him why the paper on which our scriptures are written is made from the bark of the daphne plant. Not only is it durable, but no worms or termites ever eat it. By the time we reached our campsite at Yusepang, in the midst of a forest of blue pine, we were thoroughly saddle-weary, but the aroma of the delicious hot dinner being prepared on the campfire a stew of pork and radish, accompanied by rice and grandmother's inimitable essay, which is a relish made of red chili paste. It quickly revived us. It was always a magical hour around the campfire at the end of a day's riding, and walking during these horseback journeys. Everyone would relax, tell stories, sing, and laugh over silly jokes as we sat under a sky studded with a million stars. So, quite interesting, right? How the royal family was traveling, and doesn't sound like they have too many resources at the time. Also, because it's not the same as royal family say in Britain, because anyway, the means were limited here, and without technological advances, this was the kind of life that many kings and queens they lived in these small kingdoms in India. But of course, the journey continues and more interesting thing happen. And for that, you'll have to read the book. Now, the next chapter is something that is closer to me because it talks about the Dholadhar Mountains, something where I have lived and grew up with. The chapter is called White Bearers Views of the Dholadhar, written by Kirin Narayan. And some of you, rather many of you, would not be aware of Kirin Narayan. She is an anthropologist and a writer. She was born in India but then moved to US, and she is the daughter of Didi Contractor, who was a really famous architect in the Dholadhar Mountains, and she developed a number of creative and interesting ideas and designed certain buildings in the mountains which were aligned with the nature. And she passed away very recently, a few years back. So that's the connection here. And Kirin Narayan tells us in this chapter that she witnessed these places when she was a child. But of course, now I'm sure it must have been a long time since she was here. So let me give you a glimpse of these Dholadhar mountains as described by Kirin Narayan in this chapter. Here we go. Before I ever saw the Himalayas, I knew them from my grandmother's cupboards. In her home in Nasik, where my family visited from Bombay each vacation, Ba had two large cupboards, a wooden one with a mirror on the front, and beside it a grey steel Godrej safe. Neither contained her clothes, which were always folded up in khaki-covered suitcases under her bed. Instead, both cupboards were stocked with memorabilia from her spiritual quests. Ba could not read, but she liked to boast that in her cupboard she had locked up sacred texts, all four Vedas, the Gita, several Puranas too. On the exciting occasions that Ba brandished keys in the presence of grandchildren, her cupboards swung open with the scent of a camphor and saffron. Inside there were indeed holy books, some covered in brown wrapping paper. Also, there were khaki cloth bags or silver thalis containing packets of ashy vibhuti. Then there was red kumkum, dried flowers, twisted roots, sugar balls, tiny tridents, rudraksha seeds of rare shapes. There was bright cloth that had been offered in temples, then returned, red and green with gold fringes or gauzy yellow edged in silver. There were postcards and pamphlets and framed pictures of different deities. The powers of pilgrimage places from Rameshwaram in South India to Badrinath, Kedarnath, and Gangotri in the northern reaches of the mountains were lodged in these cupboards. White sari pulled over white hair, slim, strong arms extending in grand gestures, Ba told of different gods and goddesses she had sought out at these places and the blessings they had granted her. When she spoke of the Himalayas, she told of arduous hikes, ice lingams, glaciers feeding sacred rivers. All around her, as she spoke, were framed god posters with strands of tiny electric lights looped around them. I recognized the Himalayas from Ba's cupboards immediately. Behind Shiva Bhagwan, the goddesses Lakshmi and Saraswati, seated in their respective lotuses, had lakes and forests stretching around them. The goddess Durga rode her prancing tiger in what seemed to be the stainless sky. Blue-grey Shiva sat cross-legged, lost in meditation. A cobra was wrapped around his neck. A sickle moon beamed from his forehead, and ice-capped peaks rose around him. In 1975, when I was 15 years old, my American mother decided to take up a long-standing invitation from family friends who had a summer home in Kangra, Himachal Pradesh. My parents had separated the previous year, and all my elder siblings had gone off to college in America. My mother and I were rootless, having left our home in Bombay. We were glad for the temporary grounding of the summer invitation. We took the long train trip north in April heat. In Pathankot, we hired a cycle rickshaw to carry our luggage into chaotic bus yard. The bus up to Kangra was jammed. The seats were hard and narrow, the windows so dusty that you had to peer through them to see out. The bus engine strained as we began our ascent, plains dust settling. The air thinned and cooled, green fields and forests opened out, and suddenly, like specters that just might be unusually shaped clouds, there were mountains. The Dhauladhar or White Bearing Range of the Western Himalayas rises at a northeastern angle above Kangra Valley. The mountains are mostly about 15,000 feet, with the highest peaks at 21,000. The valley, lush and patched with fields, follows the base of the mountains for more than 20 miles at roughly 3,500 feet. Looking up from the valley, the mountains are a stunning presence of green slopes rising to granite and ice. In April, before the summer, before the heat and rains, the mountains were still frosted white like a lineup of opulent birthday cakes. The friends we had come across India to visit were Sardar Gurcharan Singh and his wife Chattar. They usually lived in Delhi, but for the summer they often lived in a Kangra village. They had a home here on account of Nora Richards, an Irish actress and Indian nationalist who had lived in this village for many decades, carving up her enormous estate into land for landless untouchables, for her old students from Lahore and for city artists to retreat to. Sardar Gurcharan Singh was one of the few artists who had actually built on the land he had received from Nora. Like everyone else, my mother and I addressed the Singhs as Sardar Sahib and Mummy. They had known each other since they were teenagers, and even in their old age they had a sparkle in each other's presence. Sardar Sahib and Mummy lived downstairs, and they gave us their upstairs room. The room had a low ceiling and shuttered windows that opened out over the fields towards the mountains. On the hedges between fields were wild roses, jasmine, and honeysuckle. So that's the story by Kiran Narayan. And of course, once again, you'll have to read the entire chapter to find out what happens as the vacation goes on. And of course, there are many more interesting chapters by some of the great writers or prominent personalities. For example, there's a chapter by Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first Prime Minister. And there are also a couple of chapters, one by Rabindranath Tagore regarding his vacation in Dalhousie, and one chapter by Amitav Ghosh. So you find works of some of the great writers of this country and what their experience was like in the mountains, in the Himalayas. So that's why I feel this book is really, really special, because there is so much diversity in terms of the form, the style, in terms of the content, because over millennia, literally, so many people have traveled from different parts of India or outside India to the Himalayas. They have experienced different things. They've had adventures, they've had spiritual awakenings, and of course, some of them have lived here and experienced life at a slower pace. So all of that has been captured in this book. So if you get a chance to read the book, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. And let me know how you find it. Let me know which chapter or which piece of writing you really enjoyed. So I look forward to that. Look forward to your feedback, your responses on this book. And as far as I'm concerned, I'll move on to the next book, and I'll catch you the next time with another book. Thank you very much for listening. I will catch you the next time.